let me, I'm now sharing. Hopefully, shout if you can't see that. So hopefully that is all now working. Hi everyone, sorry I was a bit late, but hopefully that helped build some suspense. Nice to see some familiar faces. Hey Andy in particular, I see you there. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Francis, for the invite. My talk here today is really to come to talk to you about how, as coaches, you can use email to build trust and engage with your clients. So, in terms of a little agenda and how we'll run through this, I'll give a little bit about me, a little bit about EcoSend if you're not familiar with who we are and what we do. Then I'll be talking about social media versus email as channels to build trust and to engage with your clients. Then we'll take a dive through 4 steps to great email strategy and avoiding some of the common pitfalls we kind of see in bad email campaigns. And the 4th section is a bit more of a practical session based on some of the conversations I've had with some of the BetterBolderBraver / EcoSend clients. You've asked a lot about Zapier and how can I use Zapier to connect my tech stacks together. So I'm going to run through some practical examples of that and leave some time as well for questions at the end. So if that all sounds good, here is a picture of me, a little bit about me. I have nearly 8 years experience now, always in software startups. So I've always managed to avoid working in any big corporates, which is quite nice. I've also had some experience running my own copywriting agency. And what I really care about is ethical marketing and tech for good. So I find myself in quite a good place really with EcoSend because that kind of matches those two passions together. So a little bit about EcoSend. What are we? We are the planet's favorite email marketing tool. We work with B Corps, businesses for good, entrepreneurs and coaches to create more ethical email marketing campaigns that put people and planet first. So to kind of come back to that central question of why should you look to email to start conversations and build trust with your clients as coaches? Again, as a coach, if you ask yourself the question, how do I build trust with my contact base and my user base or people I haven't connected with yet? What you probably normally think about is social media. So I'll go and post content on social media and I'll use that as the main way of driving engagement and starting conversations, which is all well and good. But as you're probably aware, there are certain issues with social media, certain questions around social media. Ultimately, it's not without its problems. And that's, I think, something which is increasingly becoming prevalent over the last years, but the last months in particular, where we're seeing some kind of increasingly worrying trends across a lot of social media platforms, whether it's the takeover of X, TikTok being temporarily shut down, a lot of the recent product updates from Instagram not being particularly popular with content creators. I think the overall point is that social media is not really, was no longer that kind of guaranteed safe place for building your audience and engaging with your audience. Which brings us to email. So what about email as an alternative? So email does offer a wealth of benefits, which you may not have really thought of when it comes to engagement. And the first is that you own your own audience. You have those email addresses, assuming you've got them by legitimate means, which we can come to another point. That is your audience. So you're not beholden to any particular tech platform. EcoSend, for example, we're an email platform, but there are thousands of us out there. But your audience you own. You can move your audience across from email platform to email platform. So that de-risks you a lot from potential social media shutdowns when these social media companies can be here today, gone tomorrow, banned tomorrow, etc. And you also know that you're engaging with people who genuinely want to hear from you. Someone who's signed up to your email list is someone who has taken that as a proactive measure themselves. They want to hear from you. They want to engage with you. So they're much more of a warm audience than a much more generalized social media audience. But I think a lot of the issue is people don't think of email as a means of starting conversation because you're probably quite used to bad email practice and kind of receiving bad email practice yourself. There's a lot of key ingredients we want to go through of a great email strategy because you're probably used to maybe receiving a lot of bad emails. You've received a lot of bad campaigns, yourselves. So let's run through some of those examples of, what are bad campaigns, and then we'll look to the ingredients to make great campaigns. So the first one is probably something you've received all the time. is you were signed up to a newsletter maybe months ago, or even years ago, and you get added to a mailing list. You don't hear from the company for ages until suddenly out of the blue, they start firing you an email at Black Friday or near Christmas, or basically any time that they just want to sell you something. They don't make any effort to warm you up, to send you valuable content over time. It's just when they want something from you and they blast out an email to you. That's regardless of your recent interactions with the company. That's regardless of your relationship with the company. It's very sort of value leeching as a process. So instead of that, a much better option is to send a newsletter at a regular cadence. And that's really about using email to build that trust and credibility with your audience. You're purely using it to offer value and a kind of regular drumbeat cadence of information that you're offering them. So you're building that familiarity with your audience. And then, of course, you can pepper in sales messaging in between that regular cadence of value content that you're offering. So to kind of maybe visualize that, you'd have that newsletter drumbeat. And in between those newsletters, you'd pepper in a webinar announcement or a special deal on memberships or event sales. But what you're not doing is just that bottom tier, which a lot of companies do. You know, they see email lists as this kind of passive treasure trove that they just blast messaging to whenever they feel like it, whenever they've got a deal or they need to drive sales for the end of the quarter, which just isn't really a good way of treating your audience like humans. I have some more tips on that. It's better to stay small and start small and stay consistent. So don't jump in to write a weekly newsletter if you don't have content lined up for weeks to come. You know, start small and start with a quarterly newsletter. So once every 3 months, which is much more manageable. And then ideally, you can build that up to a monthly or ideally weekly cadence. And in terms of ideas on some of the content you can provide, it could be commenting on industry news. It could be providing updates just from yourself, interesting updates on what you're up to. If you need some kind of inspiration, you head to EcoSend.io and resources. You have the EcoSend weekly newsletter. Please do sign up to that. We put a lot of effort into the newsletter, as you can imagine we should as an email company. And it gives you a lot of ideas of kind of content. So we'll talk about product updates. We'll talk about if we are offering like special deals on trials from time to time. But mostly it's interesting content we've seen around the digital sustainability area that we want to comment on. So we're providing that content as valuable information. And also just fun things we're up to as a company. So whenever we do, we're a remote first company, but whenever we get together for maybe Christmas or a corporate social responsibility day, which is something like helping out a food bank, or we like to also do volunteer sessions at conservation sites. So we'll put photos of that and we'll give information about what we've been up to, and to spread good word as well about the need for food banks in the UK, which is going up, or some of these orchard picking sites that you can go to as a volunteer. And people might just not know that. It's great fun. You can turn up for an afternoon, pick some apples in an orchard, and it's a nice way just to get out and about. So that's the kind of content you could be using as that value offering drumbeat cadence. So tip number 2, don't treat all of your users as the same. And again, I'm sure you've probably had some examples of this yourselves from emails you've received where you are already a member or you signed up to a service and you get a bunch of emails trying to sell you a discount to that membership that you already subscribed to, or an event that you are nowhere near located to, or asking feedback on a webinar you didn't even attend. So again, that's bad email messaging practice. A lot of this comes down to bad segmentation. So to send great campaigns, you really need to know your users and segment them into smaller groups, not just one big horde. And it doesn't actually matter how large your email list, even if you've got a smaller size email list, it's still important to segment as much as possible within that user base. And that can be from a number of ways you can segment. It could be based on characteristics such as people's job positions. You may have some users in your contact base who are very senior, some who are more middle, some who are more junior. Could be company size. Some of them you could be speaking to large corporates. Some of your users might be in startups. So the messaging that you want to communicate to them is very different based on those characteristics. Or it could be some of those behavioral metrics. Are these users paying for your coaching service, or are they a free tier? Kind of basic example. Or have they attended a previous event you've hosted, or not? Because ultimately, great email campaigns aren't just about the kind of vanity metric of the number of emails you can send. They're about the performance of those emails. How many clicks are those emails getting? How many opens, or how many conversations are started from those campaigns? How many actions are actually taken as a result of those campaigns? So we really kind of promote smaller, more targeted campaigns as the way forward. Now, a lot of companies are guilty of kind of mistake number 3, which is sending an email from a no reply address. So if you send out emails from a no reply address, which a lot of companies do all the time, especially the larger ones, it's kind of like shouting at someone with a megaphone and then just walking away when they try and reply. So it's very, again, it's just not treating your audience like humans. It's treating them as just numbers on a spreadsheet, essentially. So we really recommend sending emails from an active inbox address. In other words, if you send out a newsletter from an email address, make sure you can receive replies back to that email address. If someone actually wants to engage with you, it's great. You've got to give them the opportunity to do so, not just blast them with a campaign and a no reply. And preferably from a human. So we've seen from EcoSend that emails generally perform better when they're sent from a person at rather than hello at or newsletter at. Obviously, there's some caveats to that, but generally speaking, if we send out an email, we try to make it come from Chris at EcoSend or Amira at Phil at, etc. Because again, it's much more human to human conversation. And the third point there is actively encourage responses within your newsletter content. Don't be afraid to ask people for their comments or their feedback. It's not just about you telling them information. You want to really create that as a kind of a back and forth conversation. So for a kind of practical example on this, our friend Yuval at ethicalemails.co is a great example. So I'd highly recommend signing up to our newsletter. It's ethicalemails.co. Just to really get a feel of what good emails look like, what good email campaigns look like. Yuval really nails it when it comes to that conversational marketing process. And within her emails, she will have things like promotions and membership sales and sales process. But a lot of her content is value offering. She talks about industry news. She's a digital nomad, so she's traveling. I forget where she is now, I think in Spain, but you get updates about where she is. She's been in Palermo. I know a lot about her. I feel like I know her quite well, even though I've never met her in real life, just from receiving her email campaigns. So she is a fantastic example of one-to-one campaigns. As you can see in that screenshot there, this is a blast she sent out to however many thousands of contacts she has. But if you look at that line, now over to you, Chris. Are you running any promotions? Still thinking about it? Let me know in a reply. That really speaks to me like she's actually written this email to me personally. So I'd really encourage you again for that, just to ask for replies, ask for questions within your email campaigns, and use that as a way to build conversation and build trust and familiarity. Now, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this last point, but again, a lot of these tactics in marketing are still quite ubiquitous, so it's worth touching upon. Really avoid the kind of corny marketing pressure tactics. If you're writing something and back of your mind you feel this is a bit cheesy, it's probably a bit cheesy. Best to kind of rewrite. And you'll see there some examples down the bottom, which again you'll probably receive still quite regularly from newsletters you signed up to. But if you do send emails with characters like full case, selling fast, multiple exclamation marks, emojis, not only are they cheesy and when you receive to a human they don't look very good, but actually a lot of email inboxes are now specifically designed to filter out that kind of phrase as spam. So they treat them as spam triggers. So if you're using multiple exclamation marks, if you're caps locking any of your content, that gets picked up by email inboxes. So it's just kind of not worth sending at all, because a lot of those emails won't actually reach your users' inboxes. They'll get marked straight away as spam. So again, a lot of this comes back to that initial point of treat your audience like humans. Don't resort to fake scarcity or unnecessary time limits. If something's kind of evergreen content or an evergreen membership, You don't need to tell people, there's 7 weeks left to sign up now, slots are filling up fast, because people are used to that now. People aren't stupid. They know where there's fake scarcity and real kind of scarcity. So treat your audience like humans. Don't bother with the spam. Be very careful, at least, especially in your subject lines, of anything that could be perceived as spam. Write it much more as if you're writing a one-to-one email, and then just send it to like a larger audience. Be the kind of rule to go there. And another kind of recommended resource on this is the conscious marketing movement. This is run by a friend of ours called Claudia, and has some wonderful tips on how to really steer away from what she calls fear-based marketing tactics, kind of scarcity-based marketing tactics, to much more conscious, much more ethical kind of marketing and conversational marketing. Cool. And for the final section, a bit of like as I said, a bonus tip and some practical points around Zapier. So I know I've spoken to a lot of Better Bolder Braver clients about EcoSend, and I think a lot of the questions that come up again, sort of time and time, are how do I integrate platform X with, or platform Y or platform Z with EcoSend? You've probably got a tech stack that's growing all the time, but you really want to make sure that there's integration and communication between those different platforms. So Zapier is really a great go-to guide for this. It's a no-code solution. Has a very generous free tier plan as well. So you usually don't need to actually spend anything on Zapier unless you're using over 100 tasks a month, which you have to be using actually quite in anger in order to hit a paid tier. So it's very good about the generous free tier plan. Was one of the reasons we like it and recommend it. But why should you care? So ultimately, integrated data is important, because the more disconnected your data is, the harder it is to segment your contacts and send them relevant communications. So, we talked before about not sending membership offers to existing members and other kinds of email howlers that you probably receive. A lot of those mistakes actually come from disconnected tech stacks. So if you have half of your membership data in one platform and half in another, sending good campaigns is going to be difficult, because that data is not integrated, and that risks lowering trust across your clients and people who receive those emails. So to run through some of my kind of favorite use case examples of Zapier's integration, first is calendar booking. So now, again, for a lot of coaches, you have links to book in meetings with you on your website, whether that's Calendly, an example here, or there's plenty of other examples. Essentially, they all work kind of the same, in the sense that when someone schedules a call with you, that's obviously a really hot lead, and it's really important to add them into your CRM or your email platform, so you can continue to nurture them beyond that phone call. Or if, heaven forbid, they flake on the phone call, which can happen. Platforms like Zapier work great for this. So when someone signs up for a call, that sends through a zap to your CRM, and you get that email address straight into your platform. So you've got that data. You can continue to send them engagement campaigns and nurture them, like I said, beyond that phone call, or to re-engage them and get them back on a phone call. Now, I know a lot of coaches as well use Mighty Networks or other kind of membership platforms. I think Circle is another popular one. So this is another great integration, because any membership activity, you really need to make sure that is sent across to your other platforms. So if someone becomes a member, you want that membership status updated across anywhere else that their data lives. So it's another good example of using Mighty Networks. Again, if you're using a CRM or if you're using EcoSend, you can update their profile in that CRM or in EcoSend and say, this person is no longer a free tier user, they are a paid member, and therefore obviously they should be treated differently within any automated email campaigns you have set up, or just for your own monitoring. You want to know how many paid members you have, and you want to make sure that that data is consistent across your various platforms. Eventbrite as well, or any kind of, again, platform you use to host events, Webinar Ninja, if it's something online. It's crucial to really know who attended your events and who didn't, so you can send them the right follow-up messages. You don't want to be sending feedback forms to people who didn't attend. You don't want to be, or even if you host an event 1 year and you want to rehost it again the next year, it's great to know who actually attended the original event, because they are the best leads to ask to send register ticket messages to the upcoming event. So That's another example here. If a attendee registers for Eventbrite, track that as an event or add that onto their profile within your CRM so you know to contact them next year when the event rolls around, or ask them for feedback on their attendance, so you know exactly who did and did not attend. And the nice thing about Zapier as well is it works the other way. So let's say you were using a platform such as EcoSend or another to capture email leads from your website. You want to make sure those leads go into your CRM as well. So that's another use case you could use for Zapier. If someone signs up to a email capture or to maybe a lead magnet, for example, that is a great way to create that profile and send that into your CRM and start nurturing them through maybe like a welcome sequence, any kind of nurture sequence beyond just an initial email capture to someone who could eventually become a client. So I hope that has been helpful. I know a lot of slides covered, a lot of ground covered, but yeah, hopefully that's been useful in terms of opening a bit of the, I guess, philosophy that we have towards using email. Hopefully it's been a bit of food for thought if you've maybe previously discounted using email as a means of building connection with your followers because you've probably seen a lot of bad email campaigns. Hopefully there's a few actionable tips in there on how to build email strategy. But I would love to, we got a bit of time left, so I'd also love to take some questions. The quick spiel as well, if you are interested in EcoSend, this is some of our EcoSend team. You can see us in the picture. There's a QR code there. We offer a discount to all BBB subscribers. But yes, enough of that. Would love to know if anyone had any questions, thoughts, or suggestions.
Thanks, Chris. I wonder if you want to take your presentation down and then I can explore discussion. Yeah. And I just wondered also if you might like to say a few words about all sort of flow, email flows. What's been, I mean, Chris has gone over and above when I decided to move the BetterBolderBraver email marketing operation over to EcoSend. And one of the things that Chris was incredibly helpful in setting up for me was a load of automated sequences that I had on my previous platform. And if you're just setting up for the first time and setting up on EcoSend, that's great. I had to migrate them all over, which wasn't impossible, not least thanks to Chris's help. But if you're just starting out, essentially having an automated email flow means that if somebody signs up to your newsletter, they will receive, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6 emails from you in a timely fashion, with the time between each of those emails having been determined by you and thought about carefully. But what it means is that you then don't need to send individual emails to each person that signs up, safe in the knowledge that each person that just, you know, that welcomes emails from you, invites you to communicate with them, is going to receive a sequence that takes them from not knowing very much about you to knowing enough about you that makes you feel comfortable that anything that you send subsequently is going to land on welcome it is. So I hope that kind of makes sense. And Chris, yeah, do you have any thoughts about the value of automated flows for coaches?
Absolutely.
Particularly?
Yeah, no, thanks, Francis. So when someone, for example, signs up to give you their email, that is, well, it's great. Like, people don't give out their emails very easily, and you can consider them at that point they are a warm lead and they're in a good position. But obviously, it's too early to actually sell them anything. And again, a lot of mistakes that companies make is that they get someone's email address and that person hears nothing from them until they want to sell them something. So they've gone from warm back down to cold, and then you're trying to sell them, and it just doesn't work. Whereas if at that point they are warm, they hand over their email address, you send through that drip sequence of email messaging, you keep their engagement and you keep nudging them and building their familiarity with you and your brand, so that they gently move to a more nurtured lead. And it's a great way just to give people more information about you, more information about maybe your backstory, or again, just some of that value offering content that doesn't have to be, definitely don't be sending it to them. Well, we say a kind of general rule of thumb is don't send more than 4 emails to someone within a week, particularly during their first week. But even four is probably a little bit excessive. So something like once a week is a nice cadence touch point over their first 4 weeks as a welcome onboarding journey. And then you could then elongate that out slightly more to maybe once a month for the next few months. And that's a really nice use case for onboarding users with kind of nurture content. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. It saves you a lot of manual work. You don't want to be every time you get an email having to stop what you're doing, jump into your CRM, copy their email, start sending them stuff via Gmail and typing it out each time. You really want that to be an automated but still personalized and human flow. So yeah, really good use case.
I think there were so many useful things in what you said, and I thought the thing about being quarterly, I was also thinking monthly could be good, or linking the frequency to events like if you're working with schools or the end of term, beginning of term, the kind of the cycle of the year. And I was thinking that in business sometimes people use something like a Gantt chart of thinking what events are happening in the year. Is it end of year, end of the financial year, the kind of things that might be coming up, and just thinking about you don't have to inundate people with stuff. Actually, it being little but thoughtful is helpful. And also, I guess this thing of having maybe a smaller email that's much more personal. I thought that some of the examples you gave of that addressing somebody as a human were really they resonated quite a lot. And I think this thing of sending something when somebody's first signed up, I've had the thing of somebody sending you thanking you for joining, and then sending you free resource and saying, given that you've signed up, you might be interested in this because I think it's great, or something like that.
Thank you, Barley.
Do you want to show people the back end, Chris, of how to do any segmentations, or would you rather people contact you? Because I don't want to put you on the spot, but at the same time, you're welcome to use the BetterBolderBraver back end if you want an example. If people would to see that, how do you set up smart groups? Because I think what this workshop is for is to give everyone some food for thought about what they might like to do. But what I also want people to feel confident about leaving off from it is that they would know how to go about doing some of the things that you're actually talking about. And at the very least, I suppose you can show everybody where to go on the EcoSend website, where you've got those nice videos for people about how to actually do some of this stuff. Because I think, just to be quite candid with you, Chris has, to be honest, sort of disproportionately supported me in comparison to what I pay him. An EcoSend on a monthly basis, they have a very reasonable monthly subscription rate, which, as Chris says, you'll get 15% off if you use the code that I've sent in the chat, or I've sent you the link to our page. But so Chris has held my hand a lot because I'm a complete technophobe, as some of you here will know, Kieran. But yeah, no, I'm not that bad. But Chris has just made it very, very helpful. But in addition, and I think partly, Chris, to do with the work that we've done together, it's perhaps kind of inspired you to put some videos together to help others, to do similar stuff, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Well, a few things. I think, firstly, thanks, Barley, for the comments. And you're quite right with anything that's regularly timed content is really good. So if, for example, there is, I don't know, it really depends on your industry, but if there is big news about certain regulation changes which are coming up, that makes great content to comment upon. If there's anything relevant to your industry that people are concerned about or excited about, just offering your viewpoint and commenting on that and putting that as content is really useful. And because you're probably already writing blog posts about this kind of content, I'd imagine. And if Andy doesn't mind, I'll use him as maybe an example here, because Andy has some great content on his blog. And we were having a call and he was asking me, well, I'm not quite sure about what kind of content to send in my newsletter. And I was like, but Andy, look at your blog. There's a ton of content there. And that is a great use case for taking a snippet of that content, adding the paragraph into a newsletter, and linking people to your blog. It's very gentle. It's very value offering, especially if it's related to anything, like I said, relevant to your industry. To Barley's point, that's an upcoming event or something, time based. is a great use case. And also just interesting about yourself, again, to use Andy as an example. Andy had a great blog post about like a morning routine meditation practice he's found really helpful. Like that's fascinating content because people get to know a bit about you, who you are. Again, it's very human, and that just makes great content to add within your newsletters. To Francis' point about sequences, Francis, you have more, I'd say, nuanced setup maybe than like at least starting from scratch. So if I was going to say, if someone's starting from scratch with automations, it's just like with the newsletters, it's build up slowly. Start with one automation, which is someone signs up to your website and send them through a drip cadence feed of emails. And then once you're comfortable with that, you can build up to the more kind of complex cases that you can have multiple lead magnets. Which I know, Francis, you've got multiple ebooks and lead magnets you offer on your website. So you have different streams and sequences for those. But that's maybe a bit more of like an intermediate setup case. And yeah, definitely happy to discuss that, on separate calls with people if they want to run through what we would say maybe a foundational level of automations, intermediate to, advanced setups where you can have, lots of complex sequences based on someone becoming a member halfway through the sequence. Like what happens then? You want to make sure that they branch out of that sequence. So it can obviously spider web out to much more complex sequences. But if you're starting off fresh, I'd really say start with that very simple use case of someone signs up from your website, send them one sequence, in addition to maybe ideally like a quarterly newsletter or commentary on ad hoc events or ad hoc industry news is a good place to start. And then you kind of build up from there.
Something that we talk about in BetterBolderBraver, which is coming to my mind at this moment, is how doing one thing can actually really support all the other things that you need to do in your marketing. And I think coaches often feel overwhelmed because suddenly they're solopreneurs and they are the chief exec, COO, FD, marketing manager of their own business. And that isn't necessarily something that they chose to do, consciously. They didn't choose that life when they decided they were going to become a coach. And so what we try to talk about is just starting somewhere. But what you're talking about with segmenting, and Barley picked up on it, is that when you start to think, what is the characteristics? Where do these people work? Are they able to pay for a product? Are they already paying for a product? Then you start asking yourself as a coach important questions about other things in your business. So email marketing, I think, can trigger thoughts about your product design, about your pricing, about the journey that you want to take people on, as we call it, the journey of consciousness in BetterBolderBraver. Are these people that are your ideal clients, are they problem aware, problem unaware? To what degree do they understand the concepts of coaching? And therefore, how much is there an education piece for you to do here? And so the email marketing process invites those questions that I think are really important. I also want to just say, sorry, Alistair, I'm going to use you as an example. Alistair here is somebody I've interviewed for the BetterBolderBraver podcast. In fact, it wasn't the BetterBolderBraver podcast, it was my other podcast. But Alistair's got one of the most incredible newsletters, and I've unsubscribed. I'm quite sort of ruthless with my unsubscribing, but Alistair's is one of the ones I look forward to all the time. And I would just recommend, if Alistair doesn't mind sharing a link to his, where you can sign up for it. It's just another example. I think the reason I love it so much is there's a lot of, as Chris says, it's like what a newsletter originally was for. When you buy a newspaper or you get delivered a newsletter, its primary job is to, aggregate important information that you might like to know about. But also what Alistair does, which is beautiful, is to cheerlead other people, and has this bit at the bottom of his newsletter which is dedicated to what his readers are up to. And Alistair's shtick, and what he's famous for and wonderful for doing is cheerleading climate consciousness through amazing books that he's written about adventuring and for adults and children. And he invites of his readers that they share what they're up to in terms of similar actions and activities, and then Alistair shares information about that. And I think that's just such a lovely way, as Chris says, of started creating the conversation through your email. So sorry, that was a bit of a vomit of a number of things there, but if anyone's got any reflections or thoughts on any of that, I'd be really pleased to hear.
Thank you, Francis. That's very kind of you singing my praises. Much appreciated. I'm totally obsessed with automated email newsletter sequences, which normally is the reason why no one ever talks to me in the pub. But I can already see Chris smiling, so I think I've found a friend in Chris. I just love that I can write 10 hopefully interesting blog posts, schedule them to go out one a week, and then in 5 years' time, if someone signs up to my newsletter, they'll get those 10 things. And it just seems such an efficient use of emailing time. So I love automated emails. They're great.
Yeah, once you get into it, you realize it's a real superpower. It gets kind of addictive. You're like, you want to automate everything. Yeah.
On that note, it's actually, sadly, similarly, I'm also a bit of a geek and get very excited about random things. And last night, when I should have been relaxing, or rather my version of relaxing was thinking about how I could gamify to create segments. So I was thinking, okay, I've got 1,000 people. If I arbitrarily choose 100, or if I decide I'm going to segment just people in London because, I'm there, couldn't think of anything else at the moment, but then ask those 100 people to arbitrarily choose one of 4 options in the newsletter and then just kind of whittle it down. I don't really know where I was going with this, but I wanted to offer one-to-one services as a prize almost for somebody who just threw the dice in the right combination of ways. But then, I was thinking about the ethics of it, and to what degree would I want to be very transparent along the way, that essentially what I'm trying to do is to ascertain who is interested. And if you did roll the dice, as it were, then you would be interested in winning the one-to-one. And therefore, I'm quite interested to know, are you curious about my work? Like, do you have any questions? So I think that's what I'm getting at is what are the coaching questions that you might like to ask by way of your newsletter? Or what is the conversation that you're trying to create? Like, Andy is great at being really overt about he would like to hear from other people as a coach as to what it is that they're battling with.
Yeah, I think you also just, before I forget, Francis, you made a really good point about coming back to what newsletters were originally about. The idea of newsletter is curated content, and not what they've become for a lot of companies, which is just an email list to spam out the odd sales campaign every time, marketing runs out of ideas of driving sales numbers. So yeah, it's a really good point of coming back to what were newsletters originally created for. And again, that kind of timeless point of treat your users like humans. It's funny whenever we receive bad emails, like, we know we're human, but sometimes when it comes to writing an email, we can just fall into marketing kind of bad practice and habituation, and you just keep coming back to that point of like, we're human, they're human, and communicate to each other that on that basis. I know, Francis, you mentioned there was a question around Apollo sending sales emails with Apollo. Maybe touch on that one.
Can you kindly just tell everyone what the question?
Yes.
Thank you. Somebody who couldn't be here today asked me to pass on to Chris a question about a platform I've never heard of.
Yes, I will. Hope I don't butcher this. I think it was along the lines of so the coach is using Apollo AI, which is a platform I'm not super familiar with for sales email outreach and booking meetings. So I did check out Apollo AI, and again, caveat that I haven't used it, and obviously I'm very biased. But my kind of 2 cents, I think the question was around, how is this an appropriate tool to be using to book meetings? I think they had some success off of it. So again, with all things, there are caveats. Things can and can't work, or work in better and worse ways. My biased 2 cents is that platforms like Apollo are really coming from the salesy school of outreach. So what something like Apollo.ai, hint in the name, does is, and you probably received this before, is it will go onto your LinkedIn profile, add you automated, scrape some information from your LinkedIn profile, like your job title, your last 5 years company, and put that into an email, a quote unquote personalized email using that data. Which is fine and can work, especially in kind of large batches where you're just sending out to like thousands and thousands, and it's kind of like shotgun approach. Where it kind of falls apart is if, for example, you look at Francis's LinkedIn, your job title is along the lines of "I help coaches and purposeful businesses do good," whereas the AI is expecting you to say founder or CEO, and therefore the AI's email would read, "Congratulations on being CEO at BetterBolderBraver for 5 years. That's amazing." And then some kind of sales speak, right? Obviously, that kind of falls down if you have any kind of outside of the standard LinkedIn profile, where to Francis that would read, "Congrats on being, I help coaches at businesses do good," right? So it kind of, even if it gets it right, it does enter into the kind of quote unquote uncanny valley of you're not quite sure if it's written by a human, right? Because it's not. So yeah, again, I think conversational marketing and where we're coming from as a platform is just a different philosophy to something like Apollo AI for outreach, where we would definitely want you to be using a platform like EcoSend or any kind of conversational ethical marketing strategy with the outcome to book meetings. Obviously, that's what you want. You want to be getting people into your funnel. But I think there's better, worse ways of doing it. And I think warming people up with content, during which at some point you are going to offer them special deals on one-to-one coaching or time-based meeting bookings, is a great way of doing things. Again, coming back to that drumbeat of value content and peppered in with sales messaging. Whereas the kind of cold email outreach approach is much, again, biased, is much more of a hit and hope appeal of add people on LinkedIn, send out a bunch of messages and hope that you get some people coming back from that to book your meetings. But you're not really getting anyone, apart from those meetings you book, you're not really bringing people into your ecosystem or into your community at all. Because everyone else who's not booked a meeting from that outreach campaign is just kind of ignoring you, right? And it's seeing the only familiarity you're building with them is that they're knowing that you've sent them an AI email. So you're not really bringing them into your ecosystem at all. Whereas if you're sending someone a newsletter, maybe, February, they're not ready to sign up for a coaching session, but you keep sending them valuable content, and then 4 months, 3 months time, they are maybe ready. And then that happens to coincide with when you do offer them another meeting session, and then they do book on that basis. Whereas if you're just sending out the campaigns, you're hoping that today, 27th of February, they're ready to go. If they're not, like, that's it. You're not going to continue really following up with them at all. So yeah, I'm sure it has its use case. It's industries that it works better and worse for, and you probably will still get results out of it. But it is a different kind of just a whole different philosophy and approach to email outreach, I think.
And can I also just drive home the point that most people here are coaches, and so and Tracy's asked the question that's on everyone's mind that I think we can dedicate the last 10 minutes of this session to, which is, how do I grow my newsletter list? And I just want to add to that the concept that everyone will be familiar with of low-hanging fruit and 100 true fans, as we talk about. And very much to what Chris has just been saying, how many people do you need, right? I mean, how many people do you want in your life? And do we want to throw a load of spaghetti at the wall and hope some of it sticks? But looping back to the segmenting conversation, wouldn't it be much better if we just spent a little more time being very personal and concerted, but then very clever about using tech, so that we could send messages to less people about stuff that they really care about, which is really going to land and translate to enough one-to-one group, whatever coaching offering you have, and allowing time also in your life to make sure that you're really dialing into your needs, limits, wants, and boundaries, and creating a life that means you're coaching as much as you want to, but also not coaching sometime, that you're earning as much as you need to, but perhaps not aspiring to earn more than you might need, and just all the other questions that go alongside it. They, it's all part of the mix. So yeah, how do we, and then Kieran's got a question as well, perhaps it's related to this, how do we grow our lists. Yeah, Kieran, do you want to add?
Thanks, Francis, and thank you, Chris. It's been really interesting. Mine's kind of just adding to what Tracy's talking about there. I have from another life when I first started coaching about 140 people whose email addresses, phone numbers I have. I haven't worked with them for a couple of years, but I have worked with all of them one-to-one before. I'm wondering what the best practice is for reaching out to these people. I don't want to just put them on a list straight away and sort of send them something out. But yeah, what's the best way to approach them? I've worked with all of them one-to-one before, and I think they'd like to hear from me, but I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, really good question, Kieran. And I'll answer that one first, because the way we generally recommend is, ultimately, they have given you at some point consent to contact them. So it's not like you're just emailing out of the blue. You do have that consent, you do have that familiarity. We always recommend sending a one-off specific campaign to that set of users and say, hey, it's Kieran, I know you haven't heard from me for a while, but I don't know, I'm starting a new newsletter, or I've started a new platform. I would love for you to be a part of this. If, however, you don't want to, continue to hear from me, here is a very obvious unsubscribe button, and that's loud and clear for them. So it gives them, treats them like adults, gives them the opportunity to hear from you or to hear not. And again, it's like, don't be offended if people do unsubscribe, right? Because that's actually, it's good, rather than having a large list of gray users who are never really going to want to hear from you. You've actually got engaged users, and yeah, they're much more worth your time to actually be emailing. So yeah, great questions. So send them that one-off campaign, give them some time. If they want to unsubscribe, that's fine. You can then probably maybe just get rid of their data or put it in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, and you probably don't need to come back to it for a while. But beyond that, then you've actually got some decent warm leads to work with henceforth. Yeah. And in terms of growing your list, yeah, to Francis's point, we always need to be cautious of treating email list size as a vanity metric in and of itself, because if you were just optimizing for how can I get the biggest list possible in the least amount of time, the answer to that would be go on some dodgy website and scrape the emails somewhere, and then, hey, you've got a massive list, right? You've got 10,000 contacts, but those aren't good contacts, right? So it is much, you want to grow your list, but you want to grow it with the right kind of subscribers, people who are engaged with your content, replying to your messages. And there's the classic ways of doing that. Obviously, you have to, first and foremost, and give people an opportunity to sign up to hear from you, which sounds stupid, but a lot of websites are quite static, where there's information about you, but maybe the contact page is kind of hidden away. And we get used to our websites, and we know how to navigate them, and we know where to find the contact page or the place to add an email address, but doesn't mean that someone coming to your website for the first time does. And people have short attention spans. They're not going to spend a lot of time on your website. So you want to strike that right balance between, obviously, you don't want the first thing they land on your website and you blast them with a pop-up saying, hey, sign up to my list there and then. But you do want to make sure they can sign up to your list. So not to overly promote EcoSend, but with something, you can do this with other form builder platforms if you wanted to, but you can add delays to pop-ups on your website. So you can say, if someone has been on my site for longer than 10, 15 seconds, so they're around a bit, you're giving them some time, you're not blasting them straight away, deploy one pop-up to say, hey, did you know I offer an email list? Even better if you can offer something, like a lead magnet of value to sign up. Obviously, it works much better if you're offering free value for that email. You're not just saying sign up and not offering anything. So a lead magnet plus a gentle pop-up, which doesn't keep displaying once it's been dismissed. Again, make sure that when someone says no, they don't keep getting the pop-up. It dismisses for another, maybe 7 days, give them some time. And then it comes back to that use case we discussed earlier of add them to a lead nurture sequence. And within that nurture sequence, it's also really kind of top tip as well, is remind people that if they enjoy the content, that they can forward this email to someone else who might also want to hear from you, right? So you build your list through word of mouth is one of the best ways to, as you know very well, to get clients and to build a good reputation. So within your sequences, just gently nudge people that if you're enjoying this newsletter, send it on to a couple of people. You could even offer something, for that. But say forward it on to someone who might find this of value. And again, you start gently building up your email list, but with really good contacts. And that's like a very basic way to start with, but is a good way to start. And again, I'm not saying, going way back to the start of the presentation, we're not saying just use email, don't use social media at all. I'm sure lots of you use LinkedIn. That's another good way to add posts and direct people to your newsletter. You want to use the platforms in alignment with each other to make sure that you are using, across all the platforms as much as possible. So do make use of social media. I just think the point that I really wanted to make is don't be over reliant on social media because of these factors that you don't have full control, which then kind of segues again to that point around Zapier of making sure that your data is connected across all the platforms. So if someone signs up by LinkedIn, make sure they're going into a central pot. If someone signs up, to your website, the central pot. Otherwise, it's no use having some contacts here, some contacts there. You want all the contacts under one roof because that's a really solid, well-pruned contact list. And the final point is, I'd say on this as well, is kind of counterintuitive, but don't be afraid to, cull the list as well. If you've been running a newsletter for a long time or you've been signing up contacts for a long time, you will end up with people who, maybe have email inboxes that don't exist anymore or who were interested with you at one point and no longer are. Don't be afraid to send campaigns to people who you haven't heard from in a while and remind them that they can unsubscribe, because you don't want to have a really large bloated list full of what we would call kind of gray users who, maybe they haven't unsubscribed, but they're just not really engaging with your content at all. And it's just not worth emailing them, their time or yours. And it gives you a kind of inflated sense of followers as well with these gray users. So yeah, the final point is don't be afraid to cull the list as well, because large isn't always the best.
The point you made about inviting people to forward the email on, I think is interesting. And I was thinking about techniques people use to persuade. So for example, so if it's true, you could say, did you know that our list is growing because people forward the messages on to others, or some more elegant way of saying that. But I think there's something about, if people follow the group, and if they know that actually many people, we love it when people forward our message on. And I guess I was thinking about Francis's point about having a kind of a manifesto idea, that it's actually, there's something about the bigger picture system change idea, which is actually you're trying to motivate people to be pro-social on social media. That's actually sharing a positive message is help. It's not a drain. It's actually, it's a radiator. It's actually sharing a helpful message just to try and raise the temperature on the good stuff. And yeah, so that's a few things together. But I just think something about saying other people forward useful nuggets so you can too. But I do think this thing about encouraging people, thinking about consent, encouraging people to step out is key too, because then it means people are actively joining.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have arrived at 12. This always happens very, very quickly. I think we've put in the chat a link to the EcoSend website with the BBB. I think it's BBB 15, Chris, isn't it?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
For transparency, I get a few quid for everybody that signs up, which is helpful. If you have any further questions, do get in touch with Chris, but he's far too generous with his time, in my humble opinion. But you will get a personal conversation with him, which is far more than you'd get with, I don't want to shit sling any of the other email marketing platforms, but in my experience, it's just really lovely to have an actual human being that you can talk to about actual stuff that you yourself are working on. So for me, that's been the game changer with EcoSend. So feel free to get in touch with Chris. I think most of you are in the community or know about the community, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But it's just lovely to see everybody. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you all. Yeah, great questions as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis and Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,
Lovely.
Chris.
Thank you.